Here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Alan, for coming on. It really is a pleasure to have you. Do you mind just introducing yourself, telling the audience a little bit about what your background is and what you're currently working on?
Perfect. Yeah, Mason, thank you very much. Really happy to be here. So my name is Alan Schrager. For those who don't know, I've been in basically the finance industry since I graduated college in 1990. I've been with my current firm, Oak Hill Advisors. We go by sort of OHA for 21 years. We have about $65 billion under management. We've got about 425 employees. And I sort of run our investment business day to day. So I spend a lot of my time with everyone from 21-year-old analysts to 50-year-old MDs talking to me about different investment opportunities. Prior to Oak Hill, I was in a variety of other finance roles, worked at a couple of different investment banks, merchant banks, and I'm going to turn off that phone so it doesn't ring again.
It's all good.
Hold on one second. I'm just going to turn off the phone here. Sorry about that. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about what I've done. So that's my background.
Awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about, how you got to this position, running a very successful firm over in New York?
So, these are long processes. I'm obviously been doing this for a long time, as I said. I'd say this story starts early, which is, I was the manager of the Michigan basketball team when I was in college, and I was grappling between whether I wanted to go into coaching or go into Wall Street, because I had grown up in New York. Those were sort of the two jobs that I knew. I didn't know that many other things. Never had real interest in engineering or law or any of that. And we won a national championship in 1989, so obviously a long time ago, and decided that I wasn't going to ever reach that pinnacle, or it was going to be hard to reach that pinnacle again. And basketball was sort of behind me, and started looking at Wall Street. Ended up with a job at what is now J.P. Morgan Chase, was just Chase Manhattan Bank at the time. And it sort of started me on this path where I've sort of followed my nose, where anything that was interesting, I would sort of take up. I went to business school, traveled the world for a year after my analyst program ended, and then started business school at Wharton, and then went back to Wall Street, and have really joined Oak Hill actually for more personal reasons than professional. I was working at a Drexel spinoff in LA, and met my now wife, but at the time, obviously, girlfriend and then fiance. And she was living in New York and I was living in LA. And it was easier for me to find a finance job back in New York. So I moved back to New York, joined Oak Hill, and it's been sort of a whirlwind and a real success since then. So started as, I think it was like the 30th something employee, and and then ultimately sort of built myself up to where I am today.
Awesome. And Tracy told me that you went through like a little bit of like M&A for like Oak Hill Advisors. Is that right? Can you tell me a little bit about that process, what it was like?
Sure. So it's obviously been publicly announced and released that T. Rowe Price bought Oak Hill Advisors, which is where I work. I will say I had less to do with that process than the founder of the firm, Glenn August. It was really, from our perspective, a pairing of two really great institutions, allowing us access to their distribution, and them getting access to sort of alternative credit, which is what we did and we've always done as a specialist firm. From a day-to-day perspective, it's actually impacted me very little. They let us run our own business, and so the interaction for me is low, but the firm obviously is very interactive on a marketing basis, on a financial basis, and then Glenn also serves on the board. So sort of a mixture of all the goods.
Cool. Awesome. And then just to take it back for like, more like reflection on the experience, have there been any like major lessons that you've learned or anything that you didn't expect going into this line of work?
So I've learned so many lessons, life lessons and investment lessons. Life lessons for sure. What I have definitely realized, both with me and watching, tons of people over the years, which is you sort of have to find something you love to do, something you're good at, and something you really want to work hard at. And I will say, whether success has been based on luck, which it always has a little bit of that, smarts, being in the right place at the right time, which I guess is a combination of luck and benefits from having worked hard. I do think the working hard is sort of the most important thing I've learned. I will say I started working hard as a young analyst, 35 years ago, and you always sort of envision that you're going to work yourself into a position where that's not as important. And every time I got to a new spot, I realized the only way to achieve sort of the next goal was to continue to work hard. So that has been by far the biggest lesson. I've, guys, because we've talked about it, I have two boys in high school, one's graduating, and it's like playing basketball. You don't know if shots are gonna fall, but if you work your ass off on defense, that you can contribute. And so I'm not going to always come up with the best idea, but I know if I work hard, it could lead to success, and should lead to success. I've learned in the investing world, chasing bad things, greed actually has a lot of negatives. It's obviously not a very attractive quality to begin with, but most of the mistakes that have been made in our industry, which is credit and debt, is when people have bribed you, in essence, to do things that you didn't want to do. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, you think something is not a great company to invest in, and they say, well, how about if I give it to you at a better price, or give you more coupon or whatever it is. And these very rarely work out. And so, that lesson I've learned, unfortunately, painfully, in certain instances over 35 years. But that's definitely a lesson I always take. But I think more important is, you find something you like to do, you find people you like to do it with, and you work hard at what you're doing.
Interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about, maybe your biggest deal that you've made in investment banking?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I've done a ton of investing over a long period of time. I don't know that size is always an indicative of sort of interesting. I've done large transactions across my entire career that were sort of boring, right? Sort of relatively uninteresting because they just happened to be big, but there was nothing significant about them. When I think back, okay, well, what are the interesting transactions that I've worked on and things that I've touched? When I graduated, the world was relatively quiet. 1990, if you think about the dislocation of the 80s, the end of the 80s, Drexel Burnham going under, and I started as an analyst, and very few people were working on anything. There was just not that much transaction volume. There was nothing to do. And I actually got staffed. Again, sometimes you can be good, sometimes you can be lucky. I don't know what it was, because I didn't choose me to staff myself, but ultimately it was one of those two. I got staffed on a really big deal, one of the largest deals that basically ultimately got closed during that time period. It wasn't a big deal in retrospect. It was probably a few $100 million, $400 or $500 million, which, relative to the deal sizes we do today is not that big. But at the time, it was really big. And it was really unique in the sense of that it was sort of a combination of a corporate loan and a personal loan to a large founder and entrepreneur, which I know you guys are all very, very interested in, who owned a large business and was trying to finance it through the difficulties of the crisis. And it taught me so many things. I mean, I was working so many hours, and the managing director on the deal was working alongside me because it was this high-profile deal there, and learned that minor mistakes. I made one mistake probably in the whole time period, and that minor mistake ended up being a real thorn in our side in terms of analysis that we had done, and showed me how important even the work I was doing as a 22-year-old was. And one of the funny stories I always talk about is we go to the closing dinner for this big deal, everyone's celebrating, and it was sort of expected that the most junior person on the team would pay, and then because it was easy to get reimbursed because the junior person would pay, and then the next person would sign off, and then the MD would approve it. And so I put my credit card down for the celebration. It was a few $1,000s, and it got rejected because I only had a $500 limit on my credit card. So I also learned that I needed to get a larger credit card limit, or I wasn't going to be able to celebrate as many deals as I had. But it was a fun deal, and the fact that it's 35 years and I remember almost every detail around everything we did was just great. So fun, different. I've done a lot of deals since then. I've done hundreds of billions of dollars of investing. And I would say the things that have been creative or different have been much more memorable than large.
Awesome. Cool. Interesting. How do you bring like your own creativity or like your own touch into this kind of space?
So it's a great question. My kids ask me this question too. I actually think that I'm pretty creative in terms of doing this. And I don't think most people think of finance as a creative industry, but there's a lot of ways to actually come up with different structures and different ways of dealing with that. One of the things I pride myself on is that we have a lot of partners who look to us and to me to come up with a solution to something maybe it's never happened before or never done before. So you sort of get that creative outlet where you wouldn't naturally get that in a regular way finance job. And I can't give you, there's no way to describe creativity. It's actually a funny, you ask an artist, or you ask, my brother's a musician, you ask them to sort of explain the skill, and they probably babble like I'm babbling right now. It's not that easy a thing to explain. It's really easy to explain how you can work hard. It's really actually even easy to explain how you can be smart or experienced and all that sort of stuff. Creativity is one of those things that is very, very hard to say where that comes from. I would say that why I create and where my creativity has benefited is that because I'm working hard and because I'm thinking about my job a lot, and because I love what I do, I'm constantly running through my head, hey, what are solutions to this? What's an opportunity? How do you think about this? And what would be a creative thought process? And me, it's, they always say, AI is dependent on the data sets that it gets. And in my case, there's almost a repetition of, okay, let me run through every possible scenario, and then maybe I'll run across something that's interesting or creative, and it almost feels like that's how it comes. I'm not sure people would say the same thing about me, but I definitely is how I process, is by, in essence, continuously running, different scenarios, not to obviously, given the age of our audience here, and it might actually be even too old for you guys generationally, but I always think of the Marvel movie where Doctor Strange runs through 4 million different scenarios and they're going to win one. If I run through 4 million scenarios, one of them is going to be a creative solution, and that's sort of how I get there.
Awesome. So just to kind of like wrap up about, and related to like the younger audience that we have here. So would you advise people my age who are, in high school or either graduating, the age of your sons really, to go into investment banking or finance? And if so, why would you recommend it or recommend against it?
So, like I said, I do think you're supposed to follow the things that make you really interested. If I was advising somebody, and again, my kids, the people I would advise, the most likely people for me to advise are my kids. And unfortunately, sometimes your kids are the ones who don't listen to you the most. So you can balance whether my advice carries any weight and whether it's used by anybody. I think the business over the last 30, 40 years has gotten somewhat commoditized. And what I do actually, and why I envy, sort of your entrepreneurship and how you've thought about it, I do think that the business builders of the future are really the true success. You used to be really successful working on Wall Street in the 80s. You can have been successful, and I've been lucky enough to have success over the last 30 years. It's harder to get that as time goes on. I think if it's things you like, I think finance is a great job. I think that you get to meet a lot of smart people. You get to see a lot of different things. I don't happen to love consulting, but it's similar in the sense of that you're not, in essence, doing the same thing or interacting with the same people or same companies every day, which I think is super interesting. But I also think that, and engineering and sort of healthcare, and there's so many things that are just exploding in terms of developments that are going to help society over the next 20 or 30 years. And while I have, sort of kidded myself that, and I mentioned my brother, who's a teacher, or now an educator, as a vice principal. The fact is, he is helping society. And I sort of rationalize a little bit that I do some of that because, we manage money for pension funds, we manage money for a variety of investors where ultimately that economic security is positive to them. But I am somewhat moving money around, and I don't want to pretend that I'm doing work that helps society to such an extent. And I think there are so many things that young people can do to really help society that if I was choosing again, I think it would be interesting whether I went down the same path.
Interesting. So just last question to wrap it up. Do you have any last bits of advice for the people watching this?
Yeah, so the two things that I think are the most important are personal and professional. And I think I'll end with the personal. The professional, which obviously they're sort of linked, is find something you love to do and do it really well. And I know that there's been some criticisms of people who say that, saying, you got to find something that you love and do really well, that also has a need in society. But the fact remains is it makes your life much more pleasant when you're doing that. And whether that's finance or engineering or teaching or the like, I think all of those things are really important. On the personal front, I do think that having work-life balance is important. I've learned that lesson over a long period of time, that you want to make sure that you do find that job where you can enjoy your life as well as work hard. And those things sound like they're contrary to each other, and they probably are a little bit, but ultimately I do think you have to find that balance. More importantly, especially given your listeners and sort of the age of what you're talking about, learning basic finance is really important for both success in business as well as success in life, it's amazing to me sometimes how little people understand what credit card debt does and how it works, or how to balance checkbook, or how to have a budget. All of those things are relevant to business, but they're also relevant to your own personal lives. And you'd be shocked at how many people make a lot of money but have no money, because they don't understand the difference between earnings and spending and the interaction between them. And they don't understand savings and the ability to retire at an age that's not 90. And I think that learning basic personal finance is really important. And then I think that rolls into understanding finance, whether you start a company or whether you've helped finance it in the financial industry, or you do accounting or nursing or teaching. All of those things sort of have relevance to making sure that you have basic personal finance and business finance, at least frameworks and backgrounds.
Awesome. Well, I think those are some really great bits of advice. I hope everybody can learn a little bit from this. Alan, it's really been a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mason. It was great to talk to you.
Likewise, man. Thank you.